Welcome to Religion, Religious Experiences, and Spirituality. So we'll be discussing today Chapter 2, which is the All Things Holy. So sa chapter na to, we will be talking about or tackling everything holy in all the eight major religions of the world. So magiging part 1 and part 2 to kasi medyo mahaba talaga yung chapter 2 natin. So let's start. First, let's talk about the objective of this chapter. So through this chapter, we will be discussing the holy books. So kasama yan sa chapter 1. The holy people, part 1 din yan, ng chapter 2, I'm sorry. Tapos, next meeting, we will be discussing the virtually visit the holy places in the world, enter into their holy houses, and discover their different holy days. So let's talk about the holy books. There are different assortment of sacred texts or holy books available for study in the diverse religions of the world. Itong mga texts na to are mirrored or other texts provide the core teaching of their respective religious tradition. So itong mga writing na to, they convey yung mga napag-usapan natin in chapter 1, which are the beliefs, rituals, and ethics that makes the religion what it is. Kaya different yung book on different religion because they have different beliefs, they have different rituals, and different ethics. So let's talk about the holy books of the Hinduism. Hinduism's sacred texts include the Vedas, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, and Ramayana. So may dalawang categories itong mga books na to. Una, yung tinatawag na Shruti. Shruti, which means that which is heard, ibig sabihin, this literature came from sages or the rishis who were said to have written down the text without any changes or whatsoever. So, kapag Shruti siya, sinulat siya ng mga sages nila na tinatawag na rishis. At for them, these texts are not corrupted. Kumbaga, ito na yung talaga yung naisulat mula nung umpisa pa lang. So, they were revealed than created. So, example ng Shruti is yung Vedas, Upanishads, and most important example ng mga Shruti. Pangalawa is yung Smriti. So, yung Smriti, which is remembered. So, ito yung mga stories, yung mga legends, yung mga kwentong bayan na nagpapasa-pasa na from generation to generation. So, ito yung tinatawag nating oral tradition or the law or social customs ng Hinduism. Yung pinaka-importanting Smriti are the Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita, or actually kasama siya sa Mahabharata, at yung Ramayana. So let's talk about dun sa mga Shruti muna, yung tinatawag nating mga Veda. So sa Hinduism, merong 4 na official na Veda. Later, may discuss natin ito. But the oldest and the most prominent is yung tinatawag nating Rig Veda. So pag oldest na Veda ng Hindu's book, it is the Rig Veda or the Songs of Knowledge. It is containing 1,000 hymns. At yung mga hymns na to are addressed to the gods as Indra, the warrior overcoming the power of evil, Agni, the god of fire, who linked the earth and the heaven. So katulad nga ng sinabi ko, may 4 na official Vedas yung Hindu. So later, dun sa next slide, makikita natin. Yung pinaka-old, which is the Rig Veda, teaches that life is illusionary, fleeting, and has no meaning without sacrifice. At ini-introduce din sa Rig Veda yung element of Hindu tradition or the caste system. So kung maalala natin, nung high school tayo, na-i-introduce na rin sa atin yung 4 division ng caste. Yung Brahmin, which is the priests and academics, yung Kshatriya, warriors and kings, Vaishya, merchants and landowners, Sudra, the commerce peasants, and the servants, at yung mga untouchables, yung mga nag-clean ng toilets and so on and so forth. Although, if I am correct, alam ko hindi na masyadong ginagamit ito ngayon. Hindi na ito masyadong nangyayari ngayon. Wala nang untouchables. Although still, it's engraved in the traditions of the Hindu people. So let's talk about the other Vedas. In addition with the Rig Veda, meron din tayong tinatawag na Sama Veda, which concentrate dun sa mga divine chants. Yung Yajur Veda, yung nagko-contain ng mga sacrificial rituals nila. At our Veda, nagpo-focus sa incarnation kasi nga naniniwala sila that if you sacrifice during this life, pwede kang maitaas dun dito sa kanilang caste system. So example, you are a good untouchable, nag-sacrifice ka, possible na maging Sudra ka, Vaishya, or and so on. Pero syempre, hindi naman kaagad man po-promote ka dun sa Brahmin for them. Tapos yung tinatawag nating Upanishad or yung non-mystery writing classified as a Vedic literature. Let's go to Upanishad. Upanishad, written around 600 BCE, recount the oral teaching of Hindu sages. This teaching reached about 1000 BCE. So yung mga teaching na to ng Upanishad are called the Vedanta. So end of Vedas. So Vedanta. And yung central theological teaching ng Hinduism is contained by the Upanishad because Upanishads are the oral teaching of the sages of Hinduism. So yung Upanishad deal with the nature of ultimate reality na nag-speculate ng relationship between our soul or the Atman and the soul of the ultimate or the reality. So for the Upanishad, yung soul natin is connected with the ultimate or the universal soul or the universe, which is yung Brahman. So the nature of reincarnation and the nature of creation are also primary themes of the Upanishad. Punta na tayo kay Mahabharata. So yung Mahabharata, often called the fifth Veda, isa siyang epic ng isang 110,000 couplets of recounts ng war between the Pandavas, a family that symbolizes the spirit of goodness, at yung Kauravas or yung evil. So dito yung kwento ng good versus evil. So pag good si Pandavas, Kauravas kapag evil kay Mahabharata. So hindi katulad ng mga Vedas na nag-focus dun sa mga sacrificial ritual, si Mahabharata promoted bhakti or yung devotion nila kay Lord. Dun sa Lord nila ha. In addition, unlike the Vedas, the Mahabharata was meant to be heard by all people. Yung Vedas kasi, mostly for the sages, for the people in the Brahmin system, yun yung nakakarinig nun. So the rich, the poor, men, women, so merong 6 books, book 6 of Mahabharata, which is called the Bhagavad Gita. So yung Bhagavad Gita naman is the highlight of the Smriti literature. Meron kasing dialogue between Krishna, which is the God or the avatar, the incarnation of Vishnu, the God who protects and preserves, and si Arjuna, yung warrior prince. So dito sa kwento na to, si Krishna appears on earth at an interval to fight the evil, yun ang evil family. Like Superman without the cape, kumbaga ganon. In this story, si Arjuna, or the Prince of War, good friend and chaturya siya. So si Krishna tries to convince si Arjuna na mag-go ng war against the evil. So si Arjuna, nag-refuse siya nung una. Based dun sa compassion niya and grief niya. Pero pinangaralan siya ni Krishna. Sabi niya, as a warrior, ang place ni Arjuna in the society is to wage war, which will help him to have a better birth in the next life. Kumbaga, yun yung sacrifice niya. However, as a warrior, lined up on the battlefield, he sees member of his own family on the enemy side. Diba? Napakahirap nun. So ito talaga yung ultimate dilemma ni Arjuna. To choose himself or yung kanyang family or yung kanyang duty for the gods. So si Arjuna argues that going to battle would destroy the family and hurt his cousins na nandun sa evil side. Pero again, Krishna argues that the more noble action is to dispassionately perform his duty with faith and without desire of personal gain. So kumbaga, ang sabi ni Krishna, it is better to sacrifice than to actually parang advance lang yung personal gain mo. So Arjuna finally comes to see the wisdom of Krishna argument and agrees to fight. So next is yung Ramayana. Ramayana is one of the most popular Hindu poems. So it was composed 300 BCE. So medyo bata-bata pa to. It is the story of the life of the Prince Rama. So magigets naman natin, Ramayana. It's a story of the life of Prince Rama. So in the country of Ayodhya, si Prince Rama is in exile. So parang Snow White ang dating ng kwento na to, no? So forest because of the jealousy of the evil queen, Kayeki, yung stepmother ni Rama. Diba? Sounds familiar. Parang ano lang talaga, Snow White, who was one of the kings Dasharatha's, Rama's father, 3 wives. So si Prince Rama's beautiful wife, Princess Sita, and his beautiful half-brother Laxmana insist on joining him in his exile kasi nga pinatapon siya ng kanyang jealous, evil stepmother. So si evil Kayaki asked the king Dasharatha to make her son, Bharata, king to continue Rama's exile for 14 years. So the king, heartbroken, gave in to Kayaki's wish. No? Marupok si King Dasharatha at siya ay nag-give in dun sa hinihingi nitong evil stepmother yung si Queen Kayeki. At ginawa niya ng king si Bharata, tapos namatay. Meanwhile, dun sa forest, a demon king Ravana, parang tunog Ravenna in Molawin, inabduct niya si Princess Sita and carries her off to Lanka, which is Sri Lanka na ngayon, no? Formerly in the old world or in the ancient world known as Ceylon. So si Rama, with the help of his friendly army of monkeys, attacks Sri Lanka or Lanka and rescues Princess Sita and kills the demon king Ravana. Kita natin, no? Para talagang ma-aksyon. So si Rama becomes king, but rumors persist that Sita did not remain faithful while with the demon king's side. So kumbaga may nangyari sa kanila nung Ravana. So Sita asked her earth to swallow her. It does, and the story end. Napaka-tragic nung story nila. Pero nakikita natin na yung flavor ng culture ng Hindu dun sa story na tinitel ng Ramayana. So even though Rama believes that Sita was chaste, he exiled her from the kingdom and back into the forest where she met Valmiki, the guy reputed to be the author of the poem. So si Valmiki daw ang nagsulat ng Ramayana and gives birth to Rama's twin son. The family is eventually reunited when the son come to age, but still plagued by rumor of infidelity. Yung mga marites na nung mga panahon na yon. And ask the earth to swallow her, and it does, and the story ends. So anong point ng story? The point of the story of Ramayana is doing the right thing in accordance with the law or the Dharma, and often faithful and self-sacrificial, but it's still the right thing to do. This is also applies to us, although we are not Hindu, no? Sometimes it's very difficult to obey God, especially when you are being in a dilemma of choosing between serving your God than doing your duties in your family. So let's go to Tao, Holy Book. So Taoism is founded more than 2,000 years ago, and yung advocacy ng Taoism is simplicity and selflessness. So the more simple, the more selfless you are, the more conform you are in the Taoism. According to the law of Tao, literally as the way, everything reverts to its starting point and the whole is contained in its parts. The way of tranquility is to allow the Tao, so Tao talaga, D-O-E yung banggit nito, to flow unchallenged, moving everything from a state of non-being to from state of being, non-being to being to non-being. So kumbaga, ang paniniwala ng Taoism is that you are from nothing, you become something, and then you will go back to being nothing. So the sacred text of Taoism includes the Tao Te Ching, Chuangzi, and the Chai Chi Chung. So the Tao Te Ching, or more philosophical text than the religious text, so more on philosophy, yung tinuturo ng Tao Te Ching, is, sinasabi nila, was by the great Tao teacher Lao Tzu. So was a contemporary of Confucius. So si Confucius, siya yung teacher, and isa sa mga kasunuran niya or yung mga kaedaran niya noong time na yon is si Lao Tzu. So si Lao Tzu is one who gets the credit for the writing of Tao Te Ching, si Confucius. No one really knows kung sino talaga yung actual author. Pero dahil dalawa sila na kumbaga contemporary ng si Lao Tzu at saka si Confucius, medyo hindi nako-confuse sila. Pero according to the tradition of Taoism, si Lao Tzu, siya yung actual author. Pero syempre, hindi nga nila malaman. So the entire book was fewer than 6,000 words, but doesn't it make sense? Kasi it's cryptic, it's metaphorical, it's philosophical. So the Tao Te Ching is essentially a guidebook for the Chinese rulers. Kaya nga makikita natin, di ba, kapag nanonood tayo ng mga K-dramas, meron silang mga sinasabi na quotable quotes, yung mga rulers, yung mga kings, and basically, yung mga quotes na yun, yung mga philosophies na yun yung nagbibigay sa kanila ng guide kung paano sila magde-decide. So according to the work, the way or rule effectively is to follow the idea of non-assertive action, basically action in inaction. According to Tao Te Ching, actively not acting can be even more effective than running around like chicken with its heads off. So kumbaga, minsan, according to Tao Te Ching, it is better when you are faced with adversity, it is better to do nothing. And it's more difficult to do nothing when you have something achy, no? Kumbaga, alam mo na meron kang problema and you do nothing. So, the theme central to this work includes the idea of Tao, or it's pronounced as Tao, or unchanging principle of the universe. Our role as human being is to find a way to live in harmony with the Tao. Doing so means that we will also live in harmony with others and with nature. So the idea of Te, Tao, Te Ching. So Te is not the Tao, it is the power of the Tao. So it is the unconscious functioning of the physical self. By being in tune with the Te, you can live in harmony with the forces of nature. Tapos, yun namang yin-yang, yung nakikita natin, minsan may mga tattoo na ganito, no? It means complementary. It is not opposing. Hindi to evil versus good. For them, the forces of existence, si yin, siya yung female, passive, dark, absorbing, and sustaining na part or the black part. And it is conceived as of the earth. Tapos si yang naman is the dominant male light, heat, and penetrating. So it is the heavens naman. So itong two elements na ito, they form together life and all phenomena. So Tao Te Ching urges people to follow nature, not the structure of society, arguing against the strict code of order that is found in the Confucian Analects. Ito naman tayo kay Chuang-Tzu. Kanina, doon sa ating mga Hindu books, meron din mga nagsulat. Dito naman, ang nagsulat at ang libro mismo ay tinatawag na Chuang-Tzu. Chuang-Tzu lived from 369 to 289 BCE in China, and his work is more personal and less political than Tao Te Ching. So Tao Te Ching, the book continues the idea of Tao, ito sa Chuang-Tzu, the creative force signifying way of the universe. The Tao, according kay Chuang-Tzu, is a force we must feel and know by intuition, not think or seek to describe. So kay Chuang-Tzu urges yielding and encourage personal mysticism and reflection and creative in action. So tulad nga ng sabi ko sa inyo, simplicity kasi yung pinopromote ng Tao religion, kaya nga in action. Instead of filling the mind with ideas, according kay Chuang-Tzu, assert that the Tao can best be found by emptying the mind. Kaya nga, mahilig sila sa meditation kasi nga, yun nga, gusto nilang ma-empty yung mind nila para mas ma-imbibe nila yung Tao. So let's go to Buddhism. Ito, magkakalapit tong mga to. Buddhism has two primary school of thought. Yung Theravadan form, known as the Doctrine of the Elders, practiced ito sa Burma, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos. So pag nakakita kayo ng mga Buddhist temple, malamang sa malamang mga Theravadan Buddhist, yung mga nasa bansang ito. So the role of the individual is transforming the universe. In order to do this, the person must arrive at a wisdom, gain insight into the nature of reality, the cause of anxiety, arrive at wisdom, gain insight in the nature of reality. Kumbaga ganun, ikot-ikot lang doon, and achieve the awareness that everything is just an illusion. Pangalawa is yung tinatawag nating Mahayana. For yung Mahayana form naman ng Buddhism is practiced sa Nepal, China, Tibet, sa Korea, and Japan. So this Buddhist sect believes that we are not alone in this world, but that we are helped in our spiritual journey by bodhisattvas. So yung mga bodhisattvas or semi-divine beings, kaya nga di ba sa mga K-dramas may mga deity na tinatawag, being one voluntarily renounced nirvana to return to earth to help others and attain salvation. So para sa kanila, mayroong mga deities sa mga Mahayana na nandun na sila sa heaven at bumaba pa sila dito para tumulong sa mga tao. So the goal of every Buddhist is to be a person of compassion. So kung kanina sa Hinduism, we learned that they need to be in a sacrificial, they have to sacrifice. Sa Taoism naman, we talk about simplicity, being selfless. In Buddhism naman, the goal of Buddhism at yung tinuturo ng mga secret writing ng Buddhism is compassion. So this quality is not automatic but must be cultivated by connecting with the Bodhisattva or the deities. So let's talk about naman yung mga three pitaka or literally means the three basket. Ito yung collection ng Buddhist scripture na important dun sa Theravadan branch of Buddhism na napag-usapan nga natin na in Cambodia, in Thailand, it was compiled 500 BCE, the time na si Buddha or Siddhartha Gautama came about, and the beginning of the Common Era. The Tripitaka contains three divisions or three baskets. So ito yung Tripitakas. Una yung Vinaya Pitaka, ito yung nagko-contain ng rules, regulations, and disciplinary codes for Buddhist monastery, yung mga monks nila. Yung Sutta Pitaka naman is the second division which contains the stories of life and teaching ng Dharma or si Siddhartha Gautama or the first Buddha na natin. Next is yung Abhidhamma Pitaka or the third basket, the ancient dictionary that defines religious terms. So ito yung pinaka-glossary nila, no? It discusses the element of existence and casual relationship. So let's go naman dun sa Dhammapada. Dhammapada is an anthology of Buddhist proverbs and maxims that present the teaching of Buddhist sects, Theravadan Buddhism. Yung message nito is spiritual in nature and defines kung ano yung right path of wisdom, enlightened path for the existence of transitionary world. Tapos, meron din yung Shiksha Samukya. So, yung Shiksha Samukya are present sutras or scriptural words of Buddha. So, si Siddhartha Gautama nga, written by Santiveda. So, si Santiveda, like Buddha, nirenounce niya yung world. So, si Santiveda naman, embrace yung Mahayana form of Buddhism. So sa Mahayana text naman, kung kanina yung mga Tripitaka, yun yung sa Theravadan, sa Mahayana text, they have the Tibetan Book of the Dead, translation of the Word of Buddha, translation of the treatise, great scripture stories sa China, kasi nga sa Japan, sa Korea, ito yung ginagamit, and Lotus Sutras and the Heart of Sutras. So Buddhist scripture reflect the personality of Buddha, placid in life and live in a protected environment. Si Buddha kasi kung titingnan natin yung story niya, galing siya sa isang well-off family, protected yung kanyang environment, pero he chose to leave the security of his family to search for the inner meaning of life. So let's go to Confucian text. Kanina may Lao Tzu Ching, di ba? Lao Tzu Ching. So ito kay Confucian text naman. Confucianism. Confucius considered himself the transmitter of wisdom of the ancient. He established a religion and a reputation that is recognized throughout the world. Today, the name Confucius is synonymous with the term master teacher, philosopher, and sage. Yung idea ni Confucius is that humankind could be perfected through cultivation of the mind. Kabaliktaran ng Buddhism, emptying of the mind. Ito naman, cultivation, pagpapatalino, pagpapalago ng kaisipan. His teaching emphasized devotion to parents, ritual learning, self-control, and just social activity. The authoritative texts of Confucianism are the five classic, yung Wu Qing, the four books of Su Shu. The five classic or the Wu Qing are the 2,000 years ancient books are considered the definitive authorities on Chinese law, education, social structure, literature, and religion. So, kumbaga, ito yung pinagmulan or basis ng law and everything in China. The five classic consists of the Book of History, yung Shu Qing, written during the Han Dynasty. It contains the rules and stories of both wise and wicked rulers of the past dynasties. So, kumbaga, kung titingnan natin, may kukumpara natin to sa Book of Kings and Chronicles sa Hindu Bible, ay sa Judaism Bible. Why heaven supported the sagely ruler and opposed the wicked rulers. Tapos, meron din yung the Book of Songs or the Shi Qing. Kikita naman natin to sa Psalms natin and sa Proverbs natin. So the Book of Songs contains more than 300 songs and poems, some dating back to 1000 to 500 BCE. Tapos meron din Book of Rites. So sa Leviticus naman makikita to sa atin. So sa yung Lichi, this describes the Chinese religious practices from the 8th to 5th century BCE. Meron din Book of Changes or the I Ching, dating back to approximately 3000 BCE, making it one of the oldest secret texts. So it contains 64 symbolic hexagrams, properly interpreted, understood, offer insight into human behavior. Yung I Ching recognized as one of the most popular holy book in the Eastern religions. So meron din Book of Spring and Summer or Autumn, Spring and Autumn, yung Chi-un and Chi-ui, a chronology compiled between 7228 to 481 BCE sa Confucius home state of Lu. So si Confucius may have actually dictated itong book ng Spring and Autumn. Tapos yung four books naman na Shu Shu. So each book composed of four books existed independently years before being published as a unit in 1190, knowing this material served as a basis for civil service in China. So itong four books na ito. So kailangan memorize mo ito kung magsi-civil service ka sa China noon until the early 20th century. Great learnings naman sa Confucian text pa rin is yung Ta Shui, written between 500 to 200 BC. Ito naman yung book of instruction about how to conduct the rituals properly. Tapos meron din yung Chongyong, or it emphasized naman the way towards realization of the Chunzu or the perfectly cultivated self. Tapos meron din yung tinatawag nating Analects. So itong mga Analects na to are collection of Confucius saying, yung mga hugot ni Confucius, compiled by his disciple more than 70 years after his death. So nag-convince siguro sila tapos napag-usapan nila, ano yung naaalala mong sinabi sa'yo ni teacher? So sinulat nila yon at they put it and they compiled it into the Analects. So next naman is yung si Mengsu or Mencius. It's one of the renowned Confucian scholars or isa sa mga magaling na mga naging estudyante ni Confucius. Ang sabi ni Mencius, righteousness is more important than life itself. So, ang gusto ni Mencius is people could achieve the way only through constant self-refinement and self-cultivation. So let's go naman to Shintoism. Shintoism, madalas ito nakikita sa Japan. So Shinto, or known as following the way of kami or the gods, is the religious tradition indigenous to Japan. It is it intertwined with Confucianism and Buddhism to mold Japan's culture. So it's a mix of the two, and ethics philosophy about life and death. So Shinto emphasized Makoto, meaning the completeness that an individual achieves through inner harmony and sincerity. Although yung Shinto, technically, hindi siya talaga, wala talaga silang comprehensive scripture or canons. Pero, meron silang mga mythological works, including yung Kojiki, or the records of the ancient matters. So, it is a stories about various Shinto deities ranging from their births to their battles and death. So, the first part ng Kojiki includes the story of the beginning of heaven and earth. It is a mythological tale of the kami, or yun ang power. Shinto followers learn of births of the five heavenly deities, with the myriads of deities, virtually one for every natural object or phenomena, such as the sun, the wind, meron silang deity of fire, deity of the mountain, deity of the rivers and the trees. The kamis are often referred to as a collective whole in the Shinto rituals and teaching. The Nihon or the Shoki or the Nihon Shoki or the Chronicles of Japan is the documentation or mythology or rituals begun in Kojiki. It was created or completed in 720 CE, and this book records the role of the kami in creating Japan and Japanese imperial lineage. Kasi nga, di ba, naniniwala ang Japan that their emperor is a lineage or from the god of the sun. So, as written in the Nihon Shoki, the divine pair Izanagi and Izanami brought forth Amaterasu, the sun goddess, and ancestress of the Japan emperor. Her symbol is the sun, which was consequently placed in the Japanese flag. So yun nandoon, yung nakikita natin na yung red na circle, it in the Japanese flag is actually a symbolism of their ancestress of their emperor, si Amaterasu. Ngayon, this is quite ironic kasi nga, diba, emperor, pero yung kanilang, hindi sila pwedeng, parang sa Japan, kaya nga, mamamatay na, kumbaga, yung lineage ng Japanese emperor. Kasi, yung nag-iisang heir ng Japan is a girl at hindi siya pwedeng maging emperor. Wala silang empress for them. In addition to Shinto classic outlined in the preceding list, later sources from the Kamakura period to the present of Shinto rituals and practices are found in the poetry and stories by Shinto priests and scholar. So, yung mga stories na to are called the Manyoshu, or the collection of poems written during the Nara period. Let's go to the Hebrew Bible. So, ito yung medyo malapit sa atin kasi all of us naman are maybe have already seen, read, or at least nahawakan na yung Bible. So, yung Hebrew Bible contains how God created the world and how a group of people came to know and love their God. So, they're written in Hebrew, the Hebrew Bible is called the Tanakh. So Tanakh is an acronym for the first letter of the three sections of the Hebrew Bible: the Torah, the Na or the Nevi'im, and the Ka or the Ketuvim. So Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. So Tanakh. So this acronym, the Torah, some people call the Hebrew Bible the Old Testament. So Old Testament for the Christian people, but the Hebrew people still call it the Tanakh or the Hebrew Bible. A name that makes sense only for us, of course, kasi hindi naman sila naniniwala sa New Testament. So, ang pagkakaiba din ng Christian Bible at ng Bible ng Hebrew is yung pagkakasunod-sunod. Sa kanila, una yung Torah, and then yung prophets, and then yung writings. Sa atin, una yung Torah, tapos nakapaloob yung mga writings, yung Ketuvim, which are the Songs of Solomon, Psalms, and Proverbs. Tapos sa huli, yung mga Nevi'im. Yun. So the reason the Christians believe that Hebrew prophets includes a foretelling of the coming of Jesus. So yung mga Jews kasi as of this moment still don't reference or don't believe that Jesus is their Messiah. So let's talk about the Tanakh. The first part is the Pentateuch or the Torah. Pentateuch come from the word penta, which means the first five books of the Bible, which is the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So the Pentateuch covers the story of Abraham, whom from the Jews considered the first Jew, and the end of the Jewish exodus from Egypt and entry to the promised land of Canaan, which occurred about 1200 BCE. It was probably edited and put into written form around the time of King David in 1000 BCE. And the Pentateuch consists of the 5 books of Genesis, yung creation stories. Longest story is the story of Joseph and his brothers. Exodus tells the story of the liberation from their exile from Egypt, going to the promised land. Leviticus and Numbers have fewer stories, pero more on laws and sacrificial offerings of the Jewish priesthood that administer the rituals of Judaism and biblical times. And Deuteronomy, or the narrative begins, and it actually has the 10 Commandments and the several laws, and describe the final entry to the land of Canaan and the death of Moses, and the only prophet who, according to the tradition, spoke to God directly and not through visions or dreams. Next of Tanakh is the Nevi'im, or the prophets, the second part of which includes the book of Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. Ayan sila, no? Yung mga major prophets, minor prophets, and the other prophets of the Old Testament books. Makita natin yung different. Nauna si Obadiah, Joel, Elisha, Elijah, Jonah, Mike, Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, Micah, Jeremiah also actually was the writer of Lamentation. Nahum, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Daniel, Ezekiel, Haggai, Zechariah, Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah, and the last one is Malachi. So, next, yan ang makikita natin, yung mga sinulat ng mga major prophets. Pag sinabing major prophets, hindi ibig sabihin na sila yung mas importante. It's just that na marami silang sinulat. Yung minor prophets, mas maikli yung kanilang mga prophecy. So si Jeremiah was the prophet who preached that divine justice is inescapable and warned Jews against rejecting God. Si Isaiah naman was the prophet who believed that the covenant between Israel and God was a contingent to people's conduct. He warned the Israelites that their misbehavior had broken the covenant and that God would punish them through a human agent, specifically a conqueror, which happened kasi they were conquered many, many times. Ezekiel, prophet who early statement warned the destruction of Judah, but whose later statement foretold a new covenant that God would make with restored house of Israel. Next, yung mga minor prophets, Hosea, the last king of Israel, Amos, the prophet of the doom, Jonah, the whale, kilala natin yung kinain ng whale. Zephaniah proclaimed the coming of divine judgment. Zechariah urged the Jews to rebuild the temple of Jerusalem. Si Joel urges people to repent. Obadiah, who foretold the destruction of the Edomites. Si Micah, who predicted the fall of Samaria and the destruction of Judah. Nahum, who predicted the fall of Nineveh, the capital of an Assyrian empire. Habakkuk, who predicted the coming of Babylonian invasion. Haggai, who encouraged exile to return and rebuild the temple of Jerusalem. Malachi, who rebuked the returning exile for doubting God's love. And the next is sa Tanakh is the Ketuvim, the third part of the Hebrew Bible, which includes the miscellaneous book of Psalms, 150 Psalms or songs, Proverbs containing the sayings of Solomon, Job, hindi Job, Job, containing the story of Job, a man who didn't lose faith in God despite his great sufferings. Song of Songs, also known as Song of Solomon. So marami tayo about love, attributed to Solomon, the king of Israel, who built the first temple of Jerusalem. It also contained Ruth, the story of Ruth, a widow devoted to his mother-in-law Naomi. Lamentation includes the destruction of Jerusalem. Ecclesiastes, Book of Teaching. Esther tells the story of Esther, Queen Esther, who saved the people from being slaughtered. Daniel contains the story and prophecies of Daniel, a Hebrew prophet whose faith saved him from the lion's den. Ezra contained the life story of Ezra, Hebrew prophet and a religious performer. Nehemiah recounts the work of Nehemiah, a Hebrew leader during the 5th century, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, this book of history. So the Christian Bible contains the Old Testament and the New Testament. So for the Christian, we believe that Jesus is an incarnation, meaning God being incarnated, nagkatawang tao as a man. So he was born into a Jewish family and lived as a Jew his whole life for 33 years. The Christian Bible includes the Old Testament and the New Testament and additional works. The New Testament is the main sacred text for Christianity. It records the story of Jesus' ministry, what he said and what he did, and how he became the Messiah, Lord and Savior of the Christianity. So the first part are the 4 Gospels. You Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Gospel means good news. So sa book of Matthew, yun yung 12 disciples, apostle, according to Christian tradition, he was the one who wrote the Gospel of Matthew. The Gospel is written in Jewish Christian communities. So para siya sa Jewish Christian communities that are predominantly Jewish. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus was portrayed as the new Moses or the teacher or the lawgiver. They call Christians to work on humility, faithfulness, and prayerfulness, and willingness to fast and mourn and undergo persecution. Sa Gospel of Mark naman, actually walang may alam kung sino yung writer ng Gospel of Mark. Ang sabi nila si John Mark. John Mark is one of the apostles or yung mga disciples ni Paul na nagsulat ng letters. So Mark followed Peter, one of Jesus' disciple, and copied down Peter's word. Kasi nga si Peter cannot really write kasi nga fisherman siya, therefore hindi siya learned. So in the Gospel of Mark, he wrote it for the Latin community, gearing the text to the Gentile. So for the non-Jewish people, ang audience ng Gospel of Mark, unlike the Gospel of Matthew, which is predominantly for the Christian Jewish people. Si Luke naman is actually a doctor. So Luke portrayed Jesus as prayerful, as a natural teacher, and as someone devoted to the salvation of all people. Luke most completely portrayed Jesus as one who uses parable, that is historied with meaning to reach his audience. Kung i-compare natin yung Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, yung Luke yung pinaka-complete, yung lahat ng parables. Meron kasi mga certain teaching and parables na wala sa other books, pero kumbaga, yung pinaka-complete sa kanila is yung Luke. So iba-iba kasi ito ng take. So according naman sa Christian tradition, si John was one of the first of Jesus' disciple. His gospel, the Gospel of John, is written differently than the other gospel. So ang Gospel of John, yung umpisa niya is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word become man. So parang dun sa Gospel of John, pinakita na si Jesus was already pre-existent and divine. And Jesus is the Logos or the Word. Jesus was present when God created everything. He chose to come on earth in human form so that he could redeem humankind. So according to the book of John also, Jesus is the bread of life, is the light of the world, the good shepherd, the way, the truth, and the life in John 14. So the other stuff in the New Testament are the Acts of the Apostle, the stories of the beginning of Christianity, epistles, 21 letters attributed to Peter, Paul, and James, John, Jude, and others. Pero ang mas marami dyan ang sinulat is si Paul. And the book of Revelation, which is also written by John the Beloved, the stories about the end times, and was written in the early period of the community where it was undergoing the persecution of faith. The book is filled with symbolism, dreams, and sequence and vision, which reminded those being persecuted that their suffering will end soon and that the new life with God will bring peace for all eternity. So let's move on to the Quran or the Islam text. The Quran, which is Arabic word, the recitation contains the word of the Prophet Muhammad received from Allah to the angel Gabriel. So meron din sila, makikita natin na meron din silang common ng Christian text. It was not inspired, written, or created. The Quran is, according to Muslim, the actual transcribed word of God in God's own language. So for them, God's language is Arabic. In that way, the Quran is perfect in form and in content. As such, it is different form from the holy books of other religions that were created by human authors. So Muhammad's own writing and teachings are in hadith. Ano yung basic structure nito? So si Prophet Muhammad received the Quran in tidbits, pieces, over the span or period of 23 years. So by the time yung Quran was completed, meron ng 114 surahs or chapters varying in length. So yung mga surahs na ito are not arranged in order in which Muhammad received them, with the exemption of the first surah or the opening. The other surahs are arranged from longest to shortest. So this arrangement, however, is believed to be deliberate and divinely directed according to the Islam faith. So yung basic structure or yung surahs containing the verse or the ayat, meaning the signs, and all but one surah or the 9 begins with the word in the name of Allah. So lahat ng surahs, ito yung beginning nila. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Called the Bishmala, in addition to its surahs, deals with a particular topic revealed through the surah's title. So yung first surah called the Al-Fatiha or the opening is beautiful. Simple eloquence contains the essence of Islam. So ito yung daily prayer nila. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Praise be to Allah, the Lord of the world, the beneficent, the merciful master of day of the requital. So the Quran, written in Arabic, approximately same length with the New Testament, and provides the guidance for living a life that is pleasing to Allah, or the what they call the God of Islam. By following the straight path, submitting your life and will to Allah, believers grow closer to God. Kung makikita natin, it's almost the same teaching with the Old Testament, surrendering your life to God, and also the New Testament, and also the Quran. To understand the Quran, you need to understand the Islamic interpretation of God, creation, the human itself, the day of judgment, and more. As you can see, again, it's very similar with the Christian faith. And this idea is combined with the 5 guidelines of living, which is the 5 pillars of Islam. So the nature of God for them is that as a creator, God is Allah, and as a creator is unique and singular. For them, Allah has 99 attributes or names. So it's also very similar with us, no, sa Christian faith, kasi we also call God as Yahweh Yaire, God who provide, Yahweh Nisi, the God of victory, Yahweh Yaire, the God who Yahweh Rapha, the God who heals. So almost the same, no, yung pagkakakilanlan natin kay God. So for the Muslim, God is invisible and is all-knowing, omniscient. Omniscient siya. Ganun din naman yung pagkakakalala natin, and has an awe-inspiring power, a power that instill a certain amount of fear among the followers of Islam. As a Christian, we also have this reverence or holy fear towards our God. This emotion inspires adherence to Islamic code of existence. Muslim follows the straight path, which reaps the benefits of love of Allah. Muslims who don't follow this path will face the wrath of Allah. So yung concept for creation for them is that they believe that Allah deliberately created the world and everything in it with simple command of be, which is also what is written in Genesis when God said, "Let there be." Diba? So pareho tayo ng story of creation na only by saying it, everything was created. Human naman are the most important of Allah's creation, which we also believe as Christians. that we are created in God's own image, therefore we're also special. According to Quranic law, all individuals were born inherently good. Islam doesn't have a doctrine of original sin. Yun yung pagkakaiba natin because we believe that when Adam and Eve fell and rebelled against God, naging evil na. Kumbaga, napapasa sa atin at pag pinanganak tayo yung original sin. Pero sa kanila, hindi sila naniniwala doon. So the closest thing that comes into this is humankind's tendency towards arrogance or pride. This is people to forget their place in Allah's world and commit acts that are contrary to the spirit or the law of Islam. To remind people of their proper places, Muslims must surrender to the code of Islam and the concept of struggling to become everything that Allah would want in a human being, to term jihad. So for them, meron din day of judgment, or ito yung when they die, the soul are judged as to where they should be sent, to heaven or hell, which is also what we believe in, ba? Places graphically described in Quran. So other religions, for them, yung mga other religions, the Quran accept the revelation of Torah and the New Testament. So naniniwala naman sila dun sa revelation, they actually respect our books, which are the Torah, Old Testament, and the New Testament. These revelations are incomplete for them and flawed, however. And the revelation of Muhammad, the Quran, is as a culmination of the God's revelation, completing and correcting the revelation that came before from the Torah and the New Testament. But if we will look into it, halos pareho lang. So the main point is why the need for another book when you actually just copied, no, whatever is in the Torah and the New Testament. So that's my question actually also. So let's go to section 2, the holy people. First, let's talk about Jesus, human and divine, for the Christians and Catholics. So when little is known about Jesus comes from the Gospel or the New Testament. So Jesus was born in Bethlehem through Mary, whose husband was a carpenter named Joseph. He was raised as a Nazareth, a town in Galilee. Kaya nga, Jesus of Nazareth. Diba? He became a carpenter, and when he was 30 years old, he sought out John the Baptist for baptism. After his baptism, Jesus began his public ministry by retreating into the desert for 40 days, where, according to Christian tradition, he experienced temptation from the devil and he overcame. Upon his return from the desert, Jesus recruited disciples, including those who became his 12 apostles. Jesus then took up preaching largely through parables, short stories with moral and religious messages. Through his ministry, Jesus gained a reputation as a healer of the sick and afflicted and a performer of miracles. When he was 33 years old, the Roman authorities arrested him. He was tried before the Roman procurator, Pontius Pilate, was found guilty of inciting rebellion against the Roman government. Jesus was crucified. For Christian, however, that very brief overview does not begin to cover the half of it. For them, Jesus is the face of God. He is the Messiah, the Christ, the Anointed One. Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, the three-part Godhead. God the Father, creator of the heaven and the earth. God the Son, who became human in form of Jesus. And God the Holy Spirit, who sanctifies humankind. Although divine, he chose to come to earth to redeem the sins of humankind, which he did through his death and resurrection. According to Christian tradition, after he was resurrected from the dead, Jesus ascended to heaven to sit at the right hand of God, where he will meet all who dies to offer them a new life in the next world. The coming of Jesus is called the Parousia. According to Christian belief, provide the opportunity for Jesus to finish his messianic work and defeat the forces of evil on earth. Next is si Muhammad, is also considered as the seal of the prophet and the father of Islam. Si Muhammad is the final prophet of God according to Islam, and Muhammad was born in Mecca around 570 CE. According to the legend, his mother heard a heavenly voice when he was born, and it was said that a light shone from her womb all the way to Syria. Despite the picturesque image surrounding his birth, tragedy touched Muhammad's life early. His father had died shortly before his birth. His mother died when he was 6, and his grandfather, who cared for him after his mother's died when he was 8. Muhammad's uncle then took responsibility for him. Although not wealthy, Muhammad's uncle welcomed him into his family. So when Muhammad reached adulthood, he took a job with a wealthy merchant named Khadija. Although he was more than 10 years younger than her, Muhammad impressed Khadija and she married this hardworking and honest man. The couple had 2 sons who died young and 4 daughters, one of whom provided him with grandsons. During Khadija's life, Muhammad did not take another wife. Through his marriage, Muhammad gained not only wealth and a strong political standing in the community, but also loved his wife, who was first to believe in his prophetic abilities even before himself. As much as Muslims revered Muhammad, they don't consider him divine. Ibig sabihin, he is not an emanation of God's divinity in Quran. Nevertheless, Muhammad was the last and greatest of God's prophet for the Muslims. They call him the seal of the prophets. So, paano na-reveal yung Quran? Muhammad withdrew into the desert for solace and meditation. And from that, doon niya na-encountered si God. So when he was 40 years old, that angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad, and as I've said earlier, recited for 23 years part and parcel, giving the revelation of the Quran. In Mecca, Muhammad, appointed by God and with God's own word to proclaim, began to preach the message of Allah to the people of Mecca. Yung mga tao doon did not receive it for a couple of reasons. First, he preached of one God. In Mecca, just see the context, ang pinagkakakitaan nila doon are many gods. Kumbaga, madaming god and goddesses doon. At yun yung nagdodraw ng mga tao for tourism doon. And preaching of one God will actually hurt the whole community, no? Lalo na yung pinagkakakitaan nila. His message, although more religious than political, condemned the depravity or the evilness of Meccans and unjust social order under which they live. Kaya nga, pinaalis nila sa Mecca noon si Muhammad. So, hostilities, bruise, and attacks Muhammad and his followers. So, siya ay pumunta sa Medina. Yatrib siya noong time na yon. Their cities was in chaos because of the tribal rivalries, and the members of delegation needed someone to not associated with them. So Muhammad became the middleman or middle person. So Mecca, after receiving the sign of God, Muhammad left Mecca because of the kaguluhan for Medina in 622, and the journey is called the Hijra. So doon nagsisimula yung Islamic calendar. So, sa Medina, siya ay naging spiritual leader, political and administrative leader. And Muhammad was able to build a coalition of the town factions. Kumbaga, napagsama-sama nila na sumama sa kanila from Mecca. In Medina, he gained a reputation of being an able soldier and a military strategist. And he formed alliance with a nomadic tribe and won several victory at na-conquest nila yung Mecca after some times. So, after 2 years na na-conquest na nila or nabawi na niya yung Mecca kung saan siya pinalayas, namatay na si Muhammad. Let's go to Siddhartha Gautama or the Buddha. So, Buddha means enlightened one according to the Buddhist theology. Although maraming mga Buddha, yung Buddha na tinatawag natin ngayon is si Siddhartha Gautama. According to the Buddhist tradition, Buddha had many lives before and was born as Gautama. It was in this life that he finally experienced the ultimate enlightenment and the ultimate release or the parinirvana, an end of the cycle of being reborn. When Siddhartha Gautama came into the world, an astrologer told his wealthy father that his newborn son would become either a monarch or a monk. His father, fearing the loss of his son to a religion surrounded Gautama with possession, relationship, and luxurious living conditions. Umaga natakot siya kasi pag nag-monk ka, hindi ka na sa sarili mo, parang madre na lang. You will be owned by the religion. Pero, after sometimes when he was 29 years old, naglalakad-lakad siya, he was exposed and he encountered an old man, a sick man, and a corpse and a monk. Nung nakita niya yung tatlong people, he questioned the true nature of existence. And when he saw the monk, he made in question how one could have an inner tranquility amid such misery. When he realized this, na napaka-sheltered ng life niya, he looked for answers. This revelation led him to pursue the path of asceticism and the life of self-denial. So, ginard siya ng tatay niya, pero in the end, tagpuan niya pa rin yung buhay na para sa kanya. In the early attempt of living austerely, Gautama just became frustrated. Despite fasting, meditating, denying all pressures, comfort, and just became unhappier. While denying himself, he met a young maiden who asked him if he is hungry. He asked her if she could appease her hunger. Not realizing that he was looking for a spiritual fulfillment, she offered him food to eat under a large tree, yung Bodhi tree, or the tree of wisdom. Nung nandun siya sa Bodhi tree, doon niya na-realize na an awakening in his soul and an illumination of his spirit. So, hindi deprivation yung sagot, but a balance. So, he began to understand that his own calling and started to preach a doctrine of inclusion and the middle path for 45 years. So, he was living and teaching the middle path. So, merong tinatawag na Four Noble Truths yung Buddhism. First is that existence is always tainted by sorrow and dissatisfaction. Second is the cause of sorrow and dissatisfaction is human desire and attachment to people and things. Tapos, the third one is human beings can achieve freedom from release in nirvana, and the fourth truth is the eightfold path in the way. So yung right understanding, right thought, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So, yung Buddhism, kung makita niyo yung mga Buddhist people, they abstain from killing any living things, lamok man yan, anything. Kasi for them, yung mga yun, they actually are people, kumbaga ganun, no? If we eradicate the desire of the sensual enjoyment, all sorrows and pain will end. So pag tinanggal natin lahat ng mga pagnanasa natin, lahat ng kahirapan natin ay matatanggal according to Buddhism. So let's go to Confucius. Si Confucius is a contemporary or kasabayan niya ni Siddhartha Gautama. Hindi siya religious leader like Siddhartha Gautama, Jesus, or the other people, pero more on like a philosophy teacher siya. And yung kanyang ginawa is still being used in Korea, Japan, and China. So Confucius, which is a Latinized Confucius, was born into the family that encouraged learning and ability. Yung father niya died when he was 3 years old. Pero even though ganun siya, he still shown maturity and scholarship. As a young adult, Confucius held minor government position. When he was 22, he opened the school. By his 30, he is already a prominent teacher in China. So kumbaga, kilala na siya sa China because of his katalinuhan. So, a master teacher, Confucius believed that the key virtue was cultivation of the mind. Katulad nga na diniscuss natin kanina. In his 40s and 50s, as the Minister of Justice for his home statue of Lu and a counselor of King, Confucius was able to put his ideas to social order and education into practice. He created humanities program for potential leaders and made education available for all. Under his influence, the state prospered. When jealous rival plotted his overthrow, he resigned his post and wandered for 13 years, looking for other governments and other people who would listen to his counsel? Nakakalungkot, di ba? Sinagawa naman niya, pero may mga seloso talaga mga tao na hindi mapakali kapag walang tina-turn down ng mga tao. So Confucius saw himself as a man and never claimed to be a divine. Many in China erected temples in his honor. His place of burial is a pilgrimage site for his followers. Lao Tzu is, again, as I've said, an older master of Taoism. Contemporary din sila ni Buddha, ni Confucius. So several legends relate to who Lao Tzu was. Some even speculate that he was the real person or a combination of many people, no? May mga ganong mga hearsays. The uncertainty includes the following. Lao Tzu is not an actual name. It's an honorary Chinese name, Old Master. So, yun nga kinoconnect sa kanya is the creation of Tao Te Ching, yun na napag-usapan natin kanina. Lao Tzu family is Li and born in the village of the Wuhan province, and he was in Xi. So, other information na alam natin is he was conceived by a shooting star. His mother carried him for 72 years before siya pinanganak. So he was born as a wild, wise old man with white hair already. Diba? Parang ganun na yung mga kasabihan. So the annals of both Taoism and Confucianism, Lao Tzu was believed to be the teacher of Confucius. So he was credited for the teaching and the book of Lao Te Ching. And according to legend, he wrote this book at the request of the guardian Hishan Ku Pass, through which he wanted to travel. After writing the book, Lao Tzu disappeared and was never seen again. Other information then at legend according to people is that the Tao is the unity and the creative force behind all things in seen and unseen world. So after his disappearance, they believe that Lao Tzu returned to Earth throughout history, each time assuming different personality. Some are claiming that he actually is Buddha himself returning to Earth. Lao Tzu is different people in different era of the world. So let's talk about famous messengers of God. So first is Abraham. Abraham life exists only in biblical sources. According to the Hebrew Bible, Abraham, which means father of many, is the first person Yahweh or God called. So the sign of this covenant is circumcision. So kapag 8 days old ka sa Judaism, ikaw ay circumcised. It is parang nung tinanggap or nung sumunod si Abraham, yun yung sign, it's the circumcision. Kaya nagpapa-circumcise yung mga Christians and the Jewish people. So in Christianity, you can find a deep reverence for Abraham because of his willingness not only to believe in God but also to sacrifice for God, including his own son. So kung makikita natin yung Muslim traces their ancestry back to Abraham also, katulad nga ng sinasabi natin, yung firstborn niya na si Ishmael, born of Hagar, which is Sarah's maidservant. In addition for being the father of religion, Abraham is one of the most important figures in Islam because of his willingness to sacrifice his son. Yung version naman nila, si Ishmael daw, yung sinacrifice, hindi si Isaac. Okay. So the story of Abraham began in the second millennium, and when God asked him to leave his native land, Haran, to journey to an unknown territory, which is Canaan. And for submitting to God's will, God promised that Abraham, I will make you into a great nation, which actually happened. God would be the God for Israel, and Israel would be Abraham, would be God's special people. Kaya nga, they are called the chosen people, no? So along the way, God continued to talk to Abraham, indicating that the land Abraham and his descendants would eventually possess, and Abraham constructed altars to God, and he traveled. Abraham's possession and wealth grew. Abraham seems to have it all except for her. So yun nga, dahil nga infertile yung kanyang asawa, ibinigay niya at si Hagar. In the end, magkakabibi rin pala siya, so nagkaroon talaga ng dalawang heir. Kaya nagkaroon ng faction, kumbaga. Si Ishmael is the son of the maidservant Hagar, and according to Christian, is illegitimate si Ishmael. Si Isaac naman is yung promised son, na even though 100 na si Abraham at 90 na si Sarah noon, na-conceive pa rin si Isaac. Abraham believed that God wanted him to sacrifice his son as a show of faith. Sa Islam at Christianity, magkaiba sila ng take dito. For Christianity, it was Isaac who was actually sacrificed. Pero si Ismael yung pinaniniwalaan ng mga Islam. So the Christian tradition, yun nga, si Isaac. And sa Islamic, si Ishmael. So regardless, ang point nito is that si Abraham, willing siyang na-surrender anything to actually follow God. So Abraham went to the Mount Moriah and prepared the sacrifice, whichever they believe, Ishmael or Isaac, for God. In the last minute, however, God stayed his, sinabi, wag mong isa-sacrifice. Instead, he gave a ram. Then let's talk about Moses. Si Moses naman is an important person for Judaism and Christianity and Islam also. And his life is known only from the Bible and the Quran. So people revere Moses for the following reason. First is for the freedom of Israel, for the 10 Commandments, and he is the only prophet who spoke to God directly. He was educated in Egypt and he spent 40 years of his life there as Egyptian. And then eventually, nalaman niya na hindi pala siya Egyptian dahil may napatay siya na Egyptian guard because of pinagtanggol niya yung isang slave. At doon nga, tumakas siya, nakarating siya sa Midian, became a shepherd, got married, and then while tending his ships, meron siya nakitang burning bush at doon nga nangusap sa kanya si God. At bumalik siya sa Egypt to free the people of God. So si Moses, hindi siya nakarating sa promised land because naging mainitin yung ulo niya. Kumbaga, siguro sa sobrang dami na din ng dumanak na dugo through him, hindi na inalaw ni God na pumasok siya sa Kinaan. Maraming mga kwento kung bakit hindi. Pero before he died, he actually saw afar Israel or Canaan, the promised land. Pero namatay siya along the way. According to tradition, Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, which is the Pentateuch. Although hindi to accurate, possibly kasi ang first 5 books of the Pentateuch were actually given orally before, oral tradition siya, memorize siya before. Tapos sinulat lang siya in writing in the time of King David. Next is yung mga theologians, si Augustine of Hippo. Siya yung father of the Western Christian Church, one of the most important theologians. The late antiquity, his numerous writings still influence religious scholars today. So he is from Hippo, kaya Hippo Regius, is in Algeria, and although his mother was a devout Christian and his father was a pagan, Augustine experimented with the assortment of religion during his youth and he struggled to find his spiritual identity. So doon nga, nagkaroon siya ng divine truth. So Augustine traveled to Rome and Milan, where he settled for a while and landed a teaching position at the university. So si Bishop Ambrose, after his death, si Saint Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, strongly influenced Augustine during his time, and this influence led the conversion to monastic Christianity in 386 CE. So nag-open siya ng mind niya, ng heart niya sa Christian doctrine, and he was able to completely open himself to perfect love, which delight the freely rejoice in man. During this time, Augustine equated will and love, thus enabling him to understand that acceptance of God is constituted by the love of God and the love of one another in God. So on Christian doctrine, siya yung nagbigay ng how to prepare for a preacher, work on details of Christianity, space of history, and explanation of the concept of God. Si Maimonides naman, Moses Maimonides is a writer or a scholar and theologian of the Judaism. Siya yung foremost intellectual figure of the medieval Judaism because of his ideas about philosophy, religion, and medicine. Maimonides was born and raised in Cordova, Spain, pero in his early 20s, he moved from Spain to Morocco, then Palestine, eventually to Egypt, where he settled, and Maimonides became a physician with brilliant reputation, leading to his position as a personal physician of the Sultan Saladin and his son. So, well-known siya sa essay niya ng Mishnah, first part of the Talmud. This includes the 13 articles of faith which summarize the teaching of Judaism. So, yung Mishneh Torah or Torah reviewed his work, which is systematized the code of Jewish law and doctrines, Guide of the Perplexed, his great philosophical work which he spent more than 15 years of writing. Ito yung guide message as choose to discover a rational philosophy of Judaism. Many of the faithful viewed this idea as controversial, thus stimulating the future generation of philosopher and religious scholar to reflect upon Maimonides' recommendation about looking at Judaism in a new rational light. So, although si Maimonides died more than 800 years ago, yung work niya, especially his writing on the science of medicine, astronomy, and physics, continues to read and studied today. Thomas Aquinas. Si Thomas Aquinas naman is a Christian theologian and scholar. In the eye of Roman Catholic, Saint Thomas Aquinas or Thomas of Aquino, born in the castle of Frascasessa near Naples in Italy, is the church's greatest medieval theologian and scholar. His formal recognition by the church began years after his death by Pope John the 22, canonized him in 1323. Then in 1567, Pope Pius V officially declared Saint Thomas Aquinas as a saint. So Thomas, a doctor of the church, patron of the Catholic school, an honor that seems especially appropriate because Thomas' role in the revival of learning had begun in Western Europe towards the latter part of the 11th century. So siya yung naging founder ng Dominican. Isa siya sa mga nag-join ng Dominican preaching friars. And Thomas was acknowledged as the greatest of the schoolmen as the angelic doctor. So yung focus niya is on the works of Aristotle. Thomas took upon himself the task of making Aristotle teaching blend to Christian doctrine. So meron siyang great work or the Summa Contra Gentiles and the Summa Theologiae. This work is the classical systematization of the Roman Catholic theology. So si Thomas thought that the revelation is a divine source of knowledge and that revealed truth must be accepted even if a person is not fully capable of understanding them. For the Christian naman, yung ating theologian is si Martin Luther. Si Martin Luther is the father of the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther was ordained as an Augustinian monk, pero from his study, nung binasa niya, Jesus was the sole mediator between God and humanity. So, doon na nagsimula na kasi yung Catholic teaching na maraming mga intercessors at maraming mga bagay-bagay is not in the Bible. So this teaching put him to direct conflict with the Catholic Church, which thought the faith and good works save people. So again, in the Bible, it is written that it's only through Jesus, the sole mediator, that forgiveness of sins and the attainment of salvation comes by God's grace alone, not through faith, not through good works. So the Archbishop of Mainz sponsored a sale of indulgence. Yun nga, pag nagbibigay ka ng indulgence, nababawasan daw yung kasalanan mo according to the monks. So the battle between Luther's ideas and the church ended when the church excommunicated. Tinawalag siya in 1521. Luther's excommunication didn't cow him. However, he got busy translating the Bible into German and organizing evangelical churches throughout Germany. He abolished the confession of the private mass. Priests were allowed to marry, and converts and monasteries were abandoned. These churches were founded on this principle. Salvation came through faith alone and not good works. Christ alone, not priests, could forgive sins. There are only two sacraments, baptism and the Eucharist, or the communion. May 7 sacraments ang Catholic Church, if we remember. Jesus is only symbolically present in the Eucharist. Kasi ang sa mga Catholic is yung transubstantiation, meaning na yung ostia nagiging talagang katawan ni Kristo. So, symbolically lang daw yon, sabi ni Martin Luther, and the Bible is the final authority of God. Most Protestant denominations adopted Luther's doctrine, and hundreds of years following this schism, the Roman Catholic and Protestant went their separate ways. Finally, during the 1960s, a period of Catholic history known as the Vatican II, the Catholic Church termed Protestant as separate fathers. So hindi na sila magkaaway. So let's talk about contemporary religious leaders and activists. This will be the last part. Si Tenzin Gyatso. So si Tenzin Gyatso is also known as Ocean of River, is the 14th Dalai Lama. Dalai Lama is a spiritual and earthly leader in exile of the Tibetan people, or the Tibetan Buddhism. He is revered because he is considered an enlightened being, embodying the compassionate of past, present, and future Dalai Lamas. Dalai Lama is a worldwide following of people who support his universal appeal for interfaith, respecting, and understanding. Si Tenzin Gyatso was born in a small village called Taxter in northern Tibet in 1935. And when he was 2 years old, he was first recognized as an incarnation of the earlier Dalai Lama. So thoroughly educated in the canon of monastic discipline and study of metaphysics, in 1950, he became 16 years old, and the Dalai Lama thrust onto the political stage when he became the head of state of the government of Tibet. So, although now he lives in India, kasi nga ang Tibet ay kinuha na, inoccupy na ng China, the Dalai Lama has been steadfast in his devotion to Tibet, its people, and its rich heritage. So, si Dalai Lama received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989 in recognition of his effort to preserve the cultural heritage of Tibet. Pope John Paul II, or Karol Wojtyla, Pope John Paul II is the leader of the Catholic Church. He was born in Poland in a working-class family in 1920, and he studied priesthood during the middle of the World War II and in an illegal seminary. Pero nagkaroon siya ng deep commitment to help people during the Nazi invasions, no. Tapos, when he was 48 years old, he became the first non-Italian pope for more than 450 years and one of the most well-traveled popes in the history of papacy. So, among his accomplishment is that he returned to his native land, Poland, and he became the first pope to visit the communist country. Pope John Paul was the first pope to actually visit the United States president in the White House. In 1983, he approved the first revision of the church canon law since it was being modified in 1917. In 1989, Pope John Paul reopened the diplomatic discussion about spiritual channels between Rome and the Soviet Union. And then he also was the first pope to visit the communist Cuba. In 2000, Pope John Paul offered church first formal expression of sorrow during the Nazi persecution of Jews during the World War II. Mohandas Gandhi. Si Mahatma Gandhi, or Mohandas Gandhi, is a world-famous spiritual leader, devout Hindu, and was deeply religious man who believed that God is truth. Gandhi's teaching was based on a simple principle that when people seek out the truth, they seek to know God. So, history books throughout the world describe Mahatma, the Sanskrit term for great soul. Gandhi was a social reformer and the leader of India's nationalist government and an advocate of the caste system, or the modern Hinduism. So Gandhi was raised in Hindu in a humble beginning in India and was formally educated in England. He was deeply influenced by his mother, Hindu's faith, and the faith of one of his closest friends, in Jain. So throughout the course of his travel in Europe and then South Africa, where he lived and practiced law, Gandhi was driven by his passion to help people. He was shocked by the racism na nangyayari sa South Africa and the non-violent resistance to led to jail, and he entered policies, and then he led his people to non-violent protests. So dito siya naging kilala, no, sa non-violent protests na numerous marches, including the famous March to the Sea to protest the British tax on salt to build the nationalist movement. So Gandhi became the center of India's transition from British to control to independence. So isa siya sa mga nagpalaya ng India from the British colonialism. He influenced by Bhagavad Gita's sacred Hindu text na nasabi natin kanina. He freely abandoned the wealth he achieved as a young lawyer, following the ideas of non-possession and equality. He also tended to sick and dying. So, yung kanyang attempts by teach by example, Gandhi taught the non-cooperation with government and any civil authority that enacted oppressive legislation. In order to draw attention to oppressive law and politics, he fasted for many, many days. Martin Luther King. So si Martin Luther King naman is one of the honored social activists, nonviolent then indirect action, and his philosophy about non-destructive social change, which he learned by studying and teaching of Gandhi's. Martin Luther King is a Baptist minister, and he was filled with reference by Exodus of Egypt as an example of liberation. He's also against racism, and not just a social mistake, but also a sin against God. According to them, ang racism is not only a social mistake, it's a sin against God. Yung highlights niya is he became one of the founders of Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He has delivered the famous I Have a Dream. And he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize also when he was 36 years old. He was assassinated in April 4, 1968. And President Reagan signed the proclamation declaring Martin Luther King birthday as a national holiday. Lastly is Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa is a missionary and a servant of God. The beauty of Mother Teresa, lifelong mission of God and devotion to the destitute and dying, is found in the simplicity of her message. Every person is entitled to die with dignity. Mother Teresa, devoted missionary and a servant of God, she was born as Agnes in August 27, 1910. 18 years old, he decided to become a nun, and then he was he went to Calcutta, and she decided to form a new religious order, the Missionaries of Charity. So she also had the Nobel Peace Prize in 1979, and then she received her calling in an early age, and then she also was officially recognized as a living saint, and his missionaries of charities was also recognized by the Vatican. So she passed away in 1997, and she has given more than 90 countries and included more than 4,000 nuns and many thousands of volunteers to continue her work. So that's the end of chapter 2. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you again later.